Do we have too much government?
We need to put people ahead of corporate profits.
This system is so lopsided.
This threat is a real threat to democracy.
And I think that's really important. That's something we haven't been doing in this country for a long time.
Where do you start? What do you do? How do you do it?
Access to Democracy is sponsored by Thomson Reuters, providing legal professionals with the intelligence, technology, and human expertise they need to find trusted answers. Products include Westlaw, Practical Law, and Firm Central legal practice management software for small law firms. Thomson Reuters, the answer company. Online at thomsonreuters.com. Access to Democracy is made possible in part by a donation from Firefly Credit Union. Firefly is the new name of U.S. Federal Credit Union, which has proudly served the financial needs of the Greater Twin Cities community since 1925. At Firefly, we guide our members forward and give them the power to chase dreams by delivering the financial solutions they need to get ahead. From checking accounts to mortgages, we'll light the way. We are Firefly Credit Union, and this is Life Illuminated. And Dr. Charles Crutchfield of award-winning Crutchfield Dermatology in Eagan, acknowledged as one of the nation's best physicians. A Minnesota native who trained at the Mayo Clinic, Dr. Crutchfield personally treats all patients and states that experience counts and quality matters. Crutchfield Dermatology. Look good, feel great, with beautiful skin.
Alan Miller again at Access to Democracy, and we welcome a guest who is a return guest, but I was shocked when I did the little bit of research and saw that it's been 3 years since Professor Alejandro Baer of the University of Minnesota Holocaust and Genocide Center has been here. So welcome back.
Thank you, Alan. It's a pleasure to be back. Thank you for having me.
I can't say that things around the world have gotten better in the 3 years.
No, probably not.
So
much worse.
Yeah. I don't know where to start. Well, we can start by saying Stephen Feinstein, the late Stephen Feinstein, founded the center, and it just celebrated its 20th anniversary. And as a matter of fact, Professor Feinstein was really instrumental with me in helping me get a Holocaust and genocide course started, which I taught for 6 years at Inver Hills. And
I remember you mentioned
his
that.
loss was a great loss to all of us, much too young.
It definitely was. Let me add to that we're celebrating or honoring the 20th anniversary of the Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies, which was founded by Stephen Feinstein throughout this year with a number of special programs. So it's also a way to honor the name and important work, the incredible accomplishment that Stephen Feinstein did here at the University of Minnesota. And I'm honored also to continue the legacy that he left here.
And in conjunction with that 20th anniversary, you just had a 20th anniversary seminar?
Well, we had a symposium, yes.
Yeah.
It was a symposium that I co-organized with a colleague, Joachim Sabelsberg, who's a colleague in sociology and a friend. And we titled the seminar, Comparative Genocide Studies and the Holocaust, Conflict and Convergence. We tried to explore the relation between Holocaust and genocide studies, and not just in scholarship, but also in education and in terms of what is the public awareness that we have of the Holocaust in relation to other genocides. Does the Holocaust illuminate and shed light on other instances of mass violence and genocide, or does the role of the Holocaust in this unique paradigmatic place that it has obscure these other events that might not resemble the paradigmatic event?
I think that, going back to 1933 when Hitler came to power, it has become a lot tougher for the millennials, or the Z generation as they're being called, to relate to the Holocaust. and previous 20th century genocides, because there were many. And there are still some, and there's one going on in Syria right now as we talk. So that I can't say that things have gotten terribly improved in our lifetime.
I think every generation of Holocaust educators has its own challenges, and we have certainly challenges today. The fact that it is not an event that is close in time anymore. It's 2, 3, sometimes 4 generations, depending on the age of the students in the past. Well, it also, you can see it also in Europe, that the interest in this theme is fading. And I would say that there's a danger in that. Not just the interest, that the knowledge and the importance, the significance of World War II and the Holocaust is fading. We are just in the midst of the French election that will be on Sunday. What does it mean that the Holocaust has lost its significance in Europe? Well, it means that the dread of war, that this common unifying memory that we have in Europe, and I say we because I'm a European after all, no, I'm from Spain, this common memory, which is, we might say that what unites us is this common tragic past. There might be no future, or we don't know what the future of Europe is.
We really don't.
But this tragic past is
country.
something unifying, something that we understand that must be avoided under any circumstance. Right?
Marine Le Pen has been closely associated with her father and with Holocaust deniers in Europe. And of course, the French in 2 days have a really important election in which she is a very strong contender. So that obviously all eyes are focused on France this weekend. But we've had our own problems here in this country. We have a new president who on Liberation Day of Auschwitz in January issued a statement and never talked about what the Holocaust was to 6.5 million Jews. And that to me is a very frightening thing. The same man who really has not renounced the KKK, the neo-Nazis, the white supremacists, all of whom have endorsed him and really have gotten only lip service denials. That to me is very frightening.
Yes, indeed. I think what we're living through in this country after November 9th, which is also a fateful date, no? That it was on November 9th when we heard that we learned who would be the new president, and November 9th is an important date in the history of the Holocaust, since in 1938 it was the turning point in anti-Semitic policy by the Nazis, the pogroms, the Kristallnacht pogroms.
Yes.
Which
means the night of broken glass.
The night of broken glass. So what we try to make that connection, not trying to stretch and making an equation between historical episodes, but what do we learn from thinking the US through the history of the Holocaust? Well, we're trying to ask, and that's what we did at the center with a special newsletter we sent out. We said, well, we need to learn when a society becomes numbed to the fate of its minorities. That's what happened in 1938 in Germany. And we see frightening indicators that the fate of minorities here in the US, particularly Muslim communities, but also other minorities,
the Muslims who have been
yes,
denigrated and castigated by this president and the people who support him. The Muslim population around the world is the leading population, I believe, in terms of followers. There may be, and we know that there are, some bad ones. Well, you know, there are some bad ones in just about any group. But what has happened to them here and has resulted in destruction of some of their religious buildings, the mosques. It has resulted in violence. It has resulted in death. It has frightening reminiscences of
Yes, and the
100.
fact that the community is being stigmatized or was stigmatized even at the highest political level by a presidential candidate that is now the president, that is definitely it's a very worrisome situation.
Done it to Mexicans also.
Yes.
And to others. And it doesn't, without any realization of how damaging what he says means, not only to us, but to the rest of the world.
Yes, indeed. So, well, I guess we all wonder how this will unfold in the next month. I think also, I mentioned that to you before we started, that I'm a bit, let's say, not more optimistic, but I'm a bit less pessimistic now in May than I was maybe in January. Why? Because I think also that civil society, and we saw it here in St. Paul in the the Women's March. No, it was. I understand it was the biggest rally that took place in Minnesota history, or that civil society has shown a certain backbone, that the institutions work, that there is division of power.
The sleeping giant seems to have awakened.
Yes,
much the same as we had in the 60s with opposition to the Vietnam War.
Mm-hmm.
We have had vocal and outspoken opposition here.
Yes, so I think these are positive developments. The fact that the travel ban was rapidly under that the judicial branch took that, and the constitutionality of the travel ban was put into question and was halted. That the ban was halted. I mean, these are facts that you see when a democracy is working. We were all concerned. We'll see if the division of powers continues to function. So in that sense, even if we have a president that is unpredictable, we have a civil society and we have institutions that seem to be working. So in that sense,
we certainly hope so.
Yeah.
Yes. Now, one of the things you wanted to talk about was what's going on here locally with the opposition to the name of Lake Calhoun. So,
I find that a fascinating development that is taking place in Minnesota, and I must admit that myself, as a non-Minnesota native, not as a non-US native, coming here, learning about this story, I was ignorant about the story of the native population here, particularly of the Dakota people. But it surprised me also that my students were ignorant of this story, having gone through the Minnesota public education system, in most cases, some in private schools, but their knowledge of the history of Minnesota prior to the Western, to the European settlement, or just the native history of Minnesota, was absent. So, not to speak of the U.S.-Dakota War in 1862 and its aftermath, which is a case that, according clearly to the UN Genocide Convention, that defines genocide as a series of acts committed with the intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnic, religious, or racial community, a group. Well, this applies to what happened here during the U.S.-Dakota War and its aftermath. So this is the context where we need to rethink.
Calhoun has had its name 197 years.
Mm-hmm.
So the argument is, why are we objecting to it now? And
why are we objecting to the name Calhoun?
Yeah.
Well, Calhoun was
because of what he represents.
What he represents.
What he represented at the time.
Yes. So I think the question with name change. I'm familiar with this history of name change in Spain, in Germany. The question of memorialization. With the Franco statues, for instance, we had like a period in Spain between 1975 to 2000 where the fascist dictators Franco's statues were still everywhere. They became normalized. So people didn't pay much attention to them, but they had never been removed. So is the solution to remove them? This applies to Lake Calhoun as well, to the name of Calhoun. Now people react negatively, saying, well, this has always been there. We didn't even know who this person was, what he represented. Well, that's exactly the point.
Well, we've had Confederate flags in the South.
Yes.
When people say they're historical. They are representative of a time when they were appropriate. But the question is now, more and more, they are being relegated to museums and places like that. And although one state still has the Confederate flag in its state flag, and there's a lot of argument about that at the moment.
Yeah, so I mean, if you ask me, I don't think it's not about erasing and removing that history. I think, and that's why I found this is a productive moment. The process is the real memorialization, the process of thinking through what this actually means. So there's a disruptive moment here. The disruptive moment is when the name is decided to, they decide to change a name. It's still in process. It has to go through several other instances. Now I think it was the Minneapolis Park Board that approved it. Yeah. Well, this is the interesting moment, that finally it will be removed, or at least during this process, people are thinking about this and are suddenly getting a different perception, a different understanding of the place they live in and the names and the space that they have inhabited for generations, and that normalization of barbarism, because that's Benjamin had this phrase that every document of civilization is at the same time a document of barbarism. Well, that is exactly what we have to discuss.
That there was a large Bund movement here in Minnesota in the 30s, and that a lot of areas had provisions in deeds that you could not sell your property to a black or to a Jew. And I guess people are becoming more and more aware of that today.
Yes, and that's thanks to exhibitions. Actually, a colleague, Rivelin Prell, from Jewish Studies, she's putting together a fantastic exhibit that will be this summer, and I think throughout the fall, but it will surely be during the summer and part of the fall, on anti-Semitism in Minnesota, and particularly at the University of Minnesota. That's part of the larger picture that you are referring to now, from the 30s and 40s, where you had the deeds in the real estate contracts, those policies.
We had serious problems at St. Cloud University a few years ago. And interestingly enough, a new mayor and a very progressive and aggressive police chief have really turned things around at St. Cloud to a very large degree. And there's still a lot of work to be done. But with the two of them getting the bulk of the community behind them, they've made tremendous progress. And that's what we can hope will happen in this country. Talking of groups, I mean, our treatment of Native Americans, you talk about the war with the Lakotas, our treatment, I think, has been abysmal. We have made treaty after treaty with them and broken treaty after treaty with them. We don't respect their property, we don't respect their holy burial grounds. And what are you going to do? Give them a few dollars and then cut back on the amount of money that was promised to them? Around here, we see wealthy Native Americans because of the casinos. But going around the country, you see the greatest amount of poverty, the greatest amount of lack of education, the high rise of crime and alcoholism in Native American communities. And, we certainly can't hold our head up high about that.
These are the long legacies of genocide. I mean, when we look at a genocide, the genocide does not end with the specific instances of killing, but or of forced removal. But the legacies of genocide, you feel them over generations and generations, and the fact that the rates of alcoholism, of suicide, of childs in foster care among Native American community, that this community is the minority in Minnesota that is suffering from the largest amount of these social problems. That's a fact that needs to be connected to a specific history. We cannot see this only as a present-day problem, but we have to frame it within a larger historical picture.
You wanted to talk about the Guernica bombing?
Well, yes, we're jumping from one
Jumping
topic
from
to
one
another,
to
but
I keep one eye
I-
on the clock and realize
Yes.
how much we've done and how much we have to go.
So we have still we have time for that. Well, it was the 80th anniversary of the Guernica bombing. What was the Guernica bombing? It was, well, Guernica is a Basque town in the Basque country, northern Spain, and the city was bombed in the midst of the civil war
in 1937.
in 1937, April 26, 1937. So exactly 80 years ago, and the city was bombed by the German Luftwaffe, by the Condor Legion, and by Italian planes of the Aviazione Italiana, which were allies of General Franco, the right-wing and his right-wing nationalists. During the Spanish Civil War, Franco had rised with a coup against the Spanish Republic only a couple years, no, less than a year before, 10 months before, in 1936.
I venture to guess that most people in this nation are completely unaware of the bombing that took place there.
Mhm. Yeah, that's why I think it's also important to mention
Of
it.
a
I mentioned it in my classes.
Civilian center.
Yes, this was, and that was.
It wasn't strategic. It wasn't to,
It wasn't
to get out
strategic
the
war
army
bombing.
or.
It
And we
was-
see the same thing happening in Syria today.
It was a bombing whose goal, whose mission, whose objective was to terrorize the civil population and to cause a large number of civilian casualties. So that is the significance of the Guernica bombing, and also because we always talk about the Spanish Civil War as the anteroom of World War II. Well, the Guernica bombing is the prolegomenon to the anteroom of the carpet bombing, of the massive casualties that took place during Civil War, caused by the Germans. But also, we must say that there were attacks from British and U.S. Fighters against German cities. However, I don't put these exactly on the same balance because precisely the context matters. Still, Guernica, nothing happened, in the sense that did the Western democracies support the Republic in its aftermath? There was a symbolic support, but Guernica did not result in the Western democracies supporting with weapons, supporting like lifting the arms embargo to the Republic. That what happened afterwards? Well, Franco won the war. It was the end of the Spanish Republic. It was the beginning of the ordeals in Europe.
And you talk about blemishes. The Roosevelt administration, for everything that he accomplished beneficial to this country, was made aware long before the United States really got involved in Europe of what was happening to European Jews in Austria, in Germany, in Poland. And yet there was an anti-Semitic bloc in the State Department that really kept us from getting involved. And when we were involved, which is after 1941
Yes.
and Pearl Harbor, it changed things around, but it doesn't make that go away. We just can't cover our eyes and blind ourselves to what is going on in the world. And it's pretty frightening, albeit you're not as frightened as you were 4 months ago.
In terms of U.S. politics only,
Yeah.
not
Okay.
globally, not globally. But that's why, Alan, I think that the Guernica bombing stands as a warning sign, and is still so relevant today. I mean, it has gone down in history as a symbol of tragic civilian catastrophic death, of civilian catastrophe. But I think more importantly, it is a warning. It should stand as a warning of the consequences of inaction. That is what Guernica teaches us, and I think that's the lesson that we need to teach today. I try to do it in my classes. I try to do it in the events we organize at the center. Yeah.
And that's all we can do, is try to educate and try to get the message out.
Yes, at least we...
For a nation that's always been at war with somebody.
Definitely, everyone can do something in his or her realm, right? We try to do education, we try to promote and support research on these subjects in order to gauge the causes and the devastating consequences of mass violence.
Yeah.
So this is the mission that we try to carry.
Now, what
carry on,
facilities do you have available at the center if people want to study, if people want to get more information?
Mm-hmm. Well, at the center, what we have, I would say that we try to cover like a research branch, and we have a research workshop where we involve advanced undergraduate students and graduate students in Holocaust, genocide, and mass violence research.
A library?
We have a resource library. We organize regularly educator workshops for Minnesota educators, mostly high school educators from the public education system, who we train on specific genocides or on specific topics within genocide, like ideologies of hatred. Like,
Do you have ongoing education with high school students that are brought to the center?
Now we have a program that we have labeled Genocide Education Outreach, GEO, and this pairs graduate students with organizations and high schools, like it's religious, ethnic, community organizations and high schools that very often reach out to us requesting speakers or requesting doing a workshop in the high school. So we put them together with a graduate student that is often only maybe 5 or 8 years older, so there's not this big age difference, so they don't seem like with the authority of a professor or a teacher. And they have done a fantastic work over the last 2 years, going to the communities, going to public libraries, going to high schools. Just this week we had an event in a Minneapolis high school, and just teaching about specific genocide, as I said, or just getting students involved of what research at a university means, trying to enthuse them for what academic
And how
college life is. Yeah.
What yesterday's genocides or attacks on minorities mean in today's world, certainly, and ongoing, and the proliferation of violence against minorities in this country.
Yes.
All of these things take a very big toll on our democracy. And it's centers like yours that we're really, there are not enough of. Some schools like Clark University have a very fine center, but we need more of it, not only for the Holocaust, but for what's going on in the world today, and to make these citizens, these students, better citizens and aware, and maybe someplace down the road something will click in that we won't have to talk about this time and time again.
I think Alan will continue talking about this time and time again, but we will also continue doing our mission. No? I mean, isn't it from Hillel that it says that it's not our task to finish the work, but we cannot stop working either, right?
And Professor Alejandro Baer of the University of Minnesota, and let's make sure that it's less than 2 years, 3 years before you're back here again. Thanks so much.
Thank you for having me. Thank you so much.